Kotierk, President Grímsson, not only for creating this political and intellectual space within the Arctic Circle for Inuit, but also for other Arctic Indigenous peoples. I am very pleased to introduce this panel. The overarching theme is noted here, Inuit, the future we want. And I'm extremely pleased to have been joined by Verner Hammaken, also Sara Olsvig, Aluki Kotierk, and Valerie Davidsson. Self-determination is the prerequisite to the exercise and enjoyment of all other rights. Again, self-determination is the prerequisite to the exercise and enjoyment of all other human rights. President Grímsson has already given, to a great extent, the rationale as to why this panel has been introduced this year, to ensure that the voices of Inuit are heard by all others. I want to underscore, however, at the outset that the views and opinions, the thoughts and perspectives of each participant is on the basis of their personal background and expertise. And they're not here representing any institution, organization, government, or any other entity. I've called upon each of them because of their extraordinary expertise, their views, their activity, their engagement within their own home communities in order to gain results for our people at the individual level as well as collectively. So each of them are here speaking as individual Inuk that have something to contribute to a vision for the future that we want. I've also asked each of them to respond to, on the basis of their background and expertise, economic, social, cultural, and political issues. And I would therefore like to call upon Verner Hammaken, an Inuk from Kalaallit Nunaat, to give us some words on the area of economic issues. Verner?
Thank you, Dalee. I'm so pleased to be here. When I was invited for this, I was told, just speak, from your heart, mind, and soul about the future we want. The problem is the future is infinite. All the options in the future means that what we have to talk about provides infinite opportunities. And in order to frame those thoughts that are generated by thinking about the future, I had to rely on some written words. But speaking from my heart, mind, and soul, I want a future where Inuit survives in a dignifying sense. I want a future where we can enrich the basis for our development while protecting our way of life. We also have to protect our language and our identity. I want a future where the identity of Inuit will be well recognized and respected. For us to grow, we wish to interact with other peoples around the globe in order to learn, to develop, and to support economic growth in Inuit Nunavut, a region that transcends borders but shares the Inuit way of life, a way of life that identifies us as a people. The fundamental basis for surviving as a people is the protection of our rights and be able to continue to pass on our cultural heritage to our children and to their children. Therefore, the future entails that we heed the statement, nothing about us without us. The protection of our rights is found in the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Indigenous Peoples, and with that, the affirmation of the inherent right to self-determination and the right of Indigenous peoples to determine their own priorities for development. And as Dalee was saying, a prerequisite for any act towards a desirable future is to be able to govern not only ourselves and ourselves towards others, but also to govern the resources within our land and sea. And therefore, again, in the future, I want self-determination as a foundation for self-sustained, sustainable growth. Only through self-determination will we be able to balance the protection of our culture with the development of social responsibilities, as well as political and economic relations. We must be self-sustained in our efforts to pursue healthy communities and improvement of quality of life. We must do so through innovative and creative approaches to Arctic economic growth and Inuit employment in order to secure the cultural and social well-being of our people and communities. So in my image of this future, self-sustained, sustainable growth allows us to grow with others. By being self-sustained in our efforts to grow, we strengthen our identity as a people to face the challenge of building truly open, balanced, and respectful relationships with others in the world. We can learn and develop together with others while we preempt individual forces from invalidating or even invading our basic human rights. Also, by interacting openly with the world community in this manner, we are able to contrast our lives with those of others, creating a much clearer basis for passing on our heritage to our children and their children. So this is what I mean by a future where we can survive in a dignifying sense, where we enrich the basis for our development while protecting our way of life, and where our identity is recognized as a respectable member of the world community. That, I believe, is the future we want. Verner.
Qianak Verner. I'd now like to give the floor to Sara Olsvig to address in broad and comprehensive terms social issues.
Thank you. And thank you also to Dalee, the chair of Inuit Circumpolar Council, to bringing together this panel and also previous panels at this Arctic Circle Assembly, where there's a chance for Inuit to present some of the issues that are dictating actually our everyday life and also are the premises of our development. It is very important to have this voice at conferences like this. And indeed, historical, I would say, to have two panels on the plenary session, the previous with the head of representations of the Greenland government and all Inuit panel, and now also this panel with Inuit. Before going into the future, I would actually look a little bit back in history, because when the Inuit Circumpolar Council, back then called the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, was formed up through the 1970s, one of the first resolutions done in 1977 at a meeting in Kotierk Barrow in Alaska actually had the title, "A Peaceful and Safe Use of the Arctic." That was the main message from one of the first meetings we had among fellow Inuit in the Arctic back in the 70s. And I think that the General Assembly of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, last one that was held in the summer of 2018, showed that fighting for a peaceful Arctic, an Arctic that is not necessarily only spoken about as a geostrategically interesting area subjected to militarization, is very, very important. It is so important that we hold on to the Arctic that we know as a peaceful area. And being a delegate in the Inuit Circumpolar Council Greenland delegation, I was very happy that we agreed on new wording in a declaration from the Kotierk General Assembly last year to state again that we want the Arctic to be a peaceful zone. I'm going back here in history a little bit just to give you a sense that the things that are laying ahead of us, the development we are seeing now, where Arctic issues are crawling up the agenda of the states, of the nation states. Our security, not just as individuals, the security of our children, the security and safety of our people, in the sense of social issues, is not the only security that is at risk. Our nations, our peoples, tend to be subjected in the theme of talking about the Arctic as a geostrategic area. So, in the latest years, when we are seeing that power structure is shifting south, when we are seeing that security and defense issues are moving up the agenda, it's not the first time we have seen that. And those decades that our peoples have been working through diplomacy, through what you could even call quiet diplomacy, we actually managed to develop our nations, to develop our peoples in the Arctic, actually even in spite of, for example, a Cold War. We managed to reach our fellow Inuit in Chukotka, Russia. We managed to maintain a governance on a day-to-day basis that was based on our needs and our wish for the future. And that is the force that we need to maintain in the Arctic, also even though we now see a climbing up the ladder of importance in regards to security and defense issues. And just to end up this, what do you call it, like the first comments we are giving here, I would like to say that yes, we have self-determination and self-governance structures, but de facto we have done and we do foreign policy, we do security policy, we do defense policy when we take decisions back home in our own nations. So we need to be at the table to be able to together with everyone, form the future we want. We need to be at the table. We need to be recognized, as we have been according to international law, as peoples equal to all other peoples, and be at the table where the decisions are taken. So I'll end there, and we can continue in the debate.
Sara. I'd now like to give the floor to Aluki Kotierk, and first of all, express my gratitude for calling upon her completely at the last minute. Natan Obed, the president of the Inuit Taperit Canada, was originally scheduled to be here. The delay in flights from Ottawa to Toronto caused him to miss his flight here to Reykjavik, and I was a bit in a panic, but Aluki and the position that she holds as the president of Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated is the largest landholder, the largest private landholders in Canada. She's very able in that position. It seemed only appropriate to then turn to her to give a few remarks about cultural issues in the context of the future we want. So again, Qiyanak Aluki, and please, the floor is yours.
Koyanamig Dalee, Koyanamig, Koviasik Pungatavanitu Nakama. I'm the president of Nunavut Tunngavik Incorporated, which is one region of the 4 regions across Canada. I guess the 4 Inuit regions across Canada. And when we refer to the Inuit regions across Canada, we refer to it as Inuit Nunangat. And we're just one component of the Circumpolar Inuit region of Inuit Nunat. I'm very pleased to be able to speak generally about Inuit and what we would like to see in the future and how we see ourselves being involved in the policy approaches that take place in our homes. But first, I mean, Dalee's already indicated that as Nunavut Inuit, we're the largest private landowners in Canada. But I want to just talk a little bit about how that has happened in a very short period of time in living history. It was my father's generation that lived out on the land, that were moved to communities. Currently, Nunavut has 25 communities, but they're very young communities in the sense that as Inuit, we were always nomadic and we became sedentary when we were moved into communities. And I wanted to illustrate that as a context of how far we have come when people look at where we are. As Inuit, we now have the territory of Nunavut, which is 1/5 the landmass of the Canadian landmass. And Inuit were able to achieve the changing of the Canadian map all very peacefully. And I want to remind you that it was in living history that Inuit came off the land into the communities. So in doing that, not only did they have to learn a language, English, they also had to learn a new lifestyle, and they also had to learn new governing systems and use that for their benefit to be able to change the map of Canada. And it was young Inuit, as young as 19 or 24, who had that big, audacious dream to be able to achieve that. And I think that just is an illustration of all the things that we do as Inuit, is to assert who we are, that it's all based on wanting to demonstrate and be proud of who we are. And so one of the motivating factors in creating a new territory of Nunavut was our Inuit language, was our Inuit culture, and those are the basis of why we wanted a territory where the public majority are Inuit. But not only did our Nunavut agreement create the territory of Nunavut, it also created co-management structures to ensure that Inuit are involved and engaged in any major projects that are happening in our settlement area. And I think this is crucial, and people who come and work with us in our homes need to be aware of that. And I think one of the illustrations recently is through Tadlotiu Imanga, the Canadian National Conservation Marine Area that we've agreed to, as well as Tuvayeto, which create protected areas, but also bring benefits to Inuit through infrastructure, through capacity building, through things that are important for us by having, for instance, full-time hunters provided resources through that agreement, because we are entitled to have Inuit impact benefit agreements. In addition to working through those processes within our own territory, as one of 4 regions across Canada, we've gotten a commitment from the Canadian federal government to work proactively and constructively through the Inuit Crown Partnership Committee. And we're able to look at the priority areas that we want to work on and make sure that there's benefits going to Inuit. I think one of the things that I'd invite audience members to think about is how we view the world and how we assert ourselves more in our own homelands. One of the things that we've looked at in our territory and we've suggested might be an option for us is when Inuit get sent down south, because much of the relationship is a north-south relationship in our nations, that maybe we should not look at the national borders, and maybe instead of sending Inuit health patients down to southern Canada, we should be sending them to our neighbors in Kalatli Nuna, which is just 2 hours away rather than 3 hours away. And the difference in the cultures would be less, the language, the food is similar. And so I think one of the things that we have at task is to start thinking about that and advocating for how we can increase the relationship we have as Inuit across the circumpolar world, because that will be to our benefit. And I just want to end by reminding and saying that I know that Inuit are capable. I know that Inuit are resilient and adaptable and very focused. And I have no doubt that we will be able to achieve whatever we set our mind to. Koyan namin.
I'd now like to invite Valerie Davidsson, a well-respected Yupik from Alaska, to share a few remarks. Please, Valerie.
Koyana Dalee. Huingan no hagalugo ametlamakanslu ayupiugo mamtakitlamio anakakuin lokmiok. We've talked a little bit about our differences, but I also want to talk about some of our commonalities. And really, Inuit people, no matter where we live, really want the same things for our children and our families that everyone here wants. We want our children to be healthy, we want them to be happy, we want them to be well educated, and we want them to live in safe communities. But because of where we live, sometimes a very remote nature, because of our unique relationship with our governments and our states, we have to do things differently in order to accomplish the same outcome. And we've seen what happens when we don't do that well. And unfortunately, our children are the folks who suffer the most. Sustaining healthy communities really requires strong, healthy children into the future. And if we don't have strong, healthy children, we don't have strong, healthy communities. And when we don't have strong, resilient children, we aren't healthy. And when we're not healthy, we can't be productive. We can't hunt, we can't fish, we can't go to university and succeed. We can't survive. We cannot continue to make progress for the next 10,000 years as we have in the past. And so what is the future that we want for our people? We want our cultures and our language to be reflected everywhere that we go in our communities and our states and our countries. Our cultures and our language should be reflected in our schools, not as an afterthought or as an elective, but as an integral, embedded part of the curriculum. We have to have that. And if you think of the examples of the incredible opportunities and the incredible brilliance that exists in our communities, elders being able to predict the future weather patterns for the next season is a great example of predictive analytics using the most critical math and science concepts that are unheard of in other parts of the world. They can do that without turning on the TV to look at the Weather Channel. And we also need law enforcement in our communities, and we also should be able to expect that when our women and our children travel to other communities, that they have the expectation that they can be safe, that they are protected, and right now we don't have that. And our countries really have the opportunity to support us using other models and using indigenous models of government, like self-governance. And here are some examples. In Alaska, where I'm from, we have the Alaska Tribal Health Compact, in which all 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska have assumed ownership and control over our healthcare delivery systems. Care that used to be provided on our behalf by the federal government, we are now in control of those healthcare delivery systems, and we have some of the best healthcare delivery systems in the country. We have the opportunity to do these things when we are at the center of our decision making and when our views as Inuit people are respected, and also the expectation is that we are there to participate as well. We say often, nothing about us without us. And that's true. Imagine sitting here at Arctic Circle and knowing that the country that you are from is not represented in the decision making. Would that be acceptable to you and the citizens of your country? No, it wouldn't be, and it shouldn't be. But unfortunately, often in our communities, that's our everyday experience. We don't have representation in a meaningful way. And when that happens, not only do we miss the opportunity to be fully participant, but you miss the opportunity to learn from our Indigenous knowledge and our expertise. You too could learn to predict the weather without dialing into the Weather Channel. And we've seen what happens when our people are not involved as active participants in the decision making. We've seen the outcomes. And quite frankly, the people who suffer the most are our children. And that is not acceptable. It should not be acceptable to anybody in this room that any one of our children suffers needlessly. Nothing about us without us. And it needs to be more than just lip service. It needs to be more than just consultation. There was a person who spoke yesterday, Victoria Bushman, who's a PhD student. She's Inuit from Alaska, but she lives in Greenland right now. She's studying there. And she said something yesterday that was the quote of the day for me. And she said, consultation is what we call it when we're doing it badly. And often for our people, folks are interested in consultation as long as we agree with what you're saying and we agree with what your recommendation is. But our expertise is more than just a rubber stamp. Thousands of years of experience of managing the Arctic. Thousands of years. You shouldn't miss the opportunity to take advantage and sit side by side with us so that we can learn from each other. So that we can practice true self-determination. Because when we thrive, you thrive too. Nothing about us without us. Quyana.
Quyana, Valerie. Thank you very much. We have a limited time available to us, and I want to give each of the panel members 1 minute each. Oftentimes we hear the reaction or response from others about the exercising our right of self-determination and self-government as though it's going to isolate us. So I'd like to ask each of the panel members to quickly respond in 1 minute or less as to how you would respond to that characterization that somehow if we exercise self-determination, we're isolating ourselves from others. How would you characterize it? Sara, good. 60 seconds.
Yes, 60 seconds. I think that the most important thing, and what also goes beyond, we all, the four of us have touched upon, is that everyone, our own governments, so our self-government governments, and all other governments in the world and peoples who deal with the Arctic, who work in the Arctic, take a human rights approach to the Arctic. Because we sat there in the UN for those years when the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was negotiated. We took part, we took leadership on that. And all other human rights instruments are also human rights instruments for Inuit. Our children have the rights of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Our women have the rights of women that all other women in the world have. So take a human rights approach to development in the Arctic and a human rights approach to the Arctic in general.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Aluki?
I think that it would not be an isolation approach by asserting who we are as Inuit. I think Inuit are well aware by becoming who we are even more. We are still part of the global community. And I think, in fact, it is a positive approach for us to be self-determined, because that means, similar to what Valerie was saying, we're healthier, we're sure of who we are, we have a healthy outlook on life, and we're able to enrich the life of other global citizens by the worldview that we share.
Mm-hmm. Verner?
I fully second that. Self-determination is a prerequisite for actually engaging with the world, because with that comes identity, respect, balanced relationships, and bringing something to the table that is treated with the value and respect that it deserves. So self-determination gives that power to actually contribute. And when you contribute, you are automatically being part of something bigger.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Valerie?
We hear that often, that misconception that self-governance means you're going to isolate yourselves, but that has been exactly the opposite of our experience in Alaska. The more we have exercised self-governance in our communities, the more networked we are, and the more we are sought out, and the more we are invited to participate in other activities, or quite frankly, the more often and the more comfortable we are asserting our right to do so. And self-governance is actually a way for us to extend our reach, not to limit it.
Okay, Qianak. I just have a couple of very quick comments. The reminder that, yes, indeed, self-determination is the prerequisite to the exercise and enjoyment of all other human rights, and that human rights are interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. If you change one, it changes and impacts all others. I also want to acknowledge all of the Inuit who have attended this year's Arctic Circle. There's an entire row of youth right in the front row, and I just want to acknowledge not only the youth in the front row, but all of the Inuit representatives that have been in attendance. I note that a number of different entities that have had board meetings during this time and are not present here when they've typically sent very large delegations. The final thing that I want to say is that I appreciate also the leadership of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, and again, Vera Metcalf and Lubov Tynan. We also have a staff member, Selma Ford, who has been here with us. The final reminder is the Inuit Night reception takes place this evening at 7 o'clock here at Harpa. And again, I invite each of you to join us for some cultural drumming, singing, dancing, and also to express your appreciation for who we are and what we can do to make the future we want. Qianak.